If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. I learned this the hard way with my first company, so I created NetSuite, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make smart decisions and grow with confidence. That's why companies who use NetSuite grow 3 times faster than the S&P 500.
Schedule your free product tour right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show. We're live every other Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, talking key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing social media and its effect on society, plus other headlines for digital leaders. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up AI, the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. Check us out at irpaai.com. My co-host today is Carlos Alvarenga, researcher, author, and coach, previously senior research fellow and professor at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. I've been doing that for 2 years, Carlos. I still can't get it out. I don't know why. At the University of Maryland, and has held leadership roles at World 50 Labs, EY, and Accenture. Good afternoon, my friend.
Good afternoon, Dan. Good to be back again for the show.
Good to have you. Good to see you. And you're in a different place again. You're for 2 years, you had the same background, I think, every week. And now I'm trying to get used to it.
So I'm doing a little bit of traveling this summer. So yeah, different background this time.
Good for you. Where are you today?
I am in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah. So
city of brotherly love. Still that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like Philadelphia. It's one of the cities that has real character. It's one like New Orleans. I think Baltimore also. I think just some of the cities that have their own identity and character. It's just a really interesting place. My kids have always loved it. So it's always been a favorite place for us to come and spend a few days. Mm-hmm.
Good. So we have a big topic, like a major societal business, probably 12-hour debate topic that we got to get into 40 minutes today. But before we go there, headlines for this week. With all the AI, I say this every week, with all the AI headlines, I really try each week for our show to find some non-AI tech lines, and it's hard. But I found one this week, Carlos.
Okay.
Barcodes turned 50 this week.
Well, and sticking with old tech, right, which is still available, I read today that Japan finally phased out floppy disks.
Oh my God!
So it had a law that you had to keep them around, though they don't even make them anymore. But apparently, there are still companies that are phasing out the use of floppy disks. So I thought it was kind of funny that it's kind of a blast from the past. The save, what do they say, like the save sign, right? That's still apparently a thing in Japan. So I was reading that, and also watching one of the companies that we track all the time, Tesla. I read the other day that their market share dropped below 50%. I think for the first time, electric vehicles in the U.S., which is interesting. And it was inevitable, right? So other people entered the conversation and that particular market. But in 2019, they were 75% of the market, and now they're below 50. But the barcode thing is really interesting because it goes back to my former career in supply chain consulting, right? And in thinking about the movement from barcodes to scanning and all these other things. It's such a remarkable invention, right? This idea of these little lines that would then can tell you all kinds of things about our product. I think it's one of the really neat things that somebody would conceive of and became kind of ubiquitous everywhere, right? So change retail, change a whole bunch of industries, right? Certainly supply chain. Mm-hmm.
So trivia question for you, Carlos, 2-point question.
All right.
Where did it start? And what did it start with? By the way, I knew neither of these, so just to make you feel better.
I have. It seems like either an MIT sort of thing because they do a lot of this kind of thing, or somewhere in Europe. And I don't. But the answer is I don't know.
So it was in Ohio.
Wow.
Of all places, Ohio. Now, I don't know where it was developed. I know on Long Island, there's Symbol Technologies was on Long Island, but the first use supposedly was at a supermarket in Ohio. On a pack of chewing gum. That was the useless trivia for the day, but that was the first use of a barcode. So what's interesting about it, though, actually, for our conversations is they're coming out with a new version. It's a 2D version of the barcode, similar to a QR code,
Right.
but it's going to contain a lot more information. So for food products, for example, it'll include ingredient details, and you can use it for I guess transmitting a lot more information than you could obviously in the old barcodes or even in the QR codes. But the organization that's responsible for, apparently there's an organization that manages barcodes, and they're got this underway, and it'll be rolled out in completion by 2027.
It reminds you of a story, not about barcodes, but RFID, right? The tags. And I was talking to one of the people who developed RFID tags, and he told me this great story about how after he got his PhD, that was in the lab, and they were working on getting a robot to identify a box of oranges, right? That the robot could sort of scan it or in some way know, okay, this is a box of oranges. And they tried this for 10 years. He said, this is the story. And they weren't able to crack the problem. And then somebody said, hey, why don't we have the box tell the robot, I'm a box of oranges. And from that conversation,
that's funny.
The machine what it is. And so it's one of these things it's so many technologies, right, that seem, I don't want to say commonplace, because they're not common at all. I mean, they're everywhere. But when you look behind them, they're really remarkable, right? It's the conceptualization of what these things are and how they operate. But supply chain has a lot of that kind of stuff, the things that people take for granted. And then containerization, right? Another thing, tracking something all over the world, following a package right from point A to point B. I did that early in my career. And it's the complexity of the math and just the intellect that it took to create these things. It's lost in the fact that they work so well, right? And they're so kind of everywhere. So yeah, well, congratulations to the
happy birthday to barcodes. Okay, so let's move on. So AI news this week. Couple tidbits. Bloomberg's reporting that Apple is not paying for its Chat GPT deal. Meta is restructuring their what they call their Reality Labs division, all around the metaverse and the Quest headset. And Amazon is reportedly building a rival to Chat GPT.
Right. And everybody's in the race now, right, to make this stuff work. And it's that I've been doing a little bit of AI work, kind of getting into this kind of how this stuff works. And on the one hand, it's simpler than people think, but on the other hand, it's way more interesting than it's sort of I thought about it before getting into opening the hood and seeing how this stuff works. And it'll be fun to see how this stuff begins to appear. Everything I've read about Apple, right, is that they think of it as an enabling technology, not as a thing in and of itself. We'll see who's right.
Microsoft, it's interesting, right? Like you say, all these companies rushing to build. Meta's trying to build it. Amazon's trying to build it. I mean, there's literally a dozen startups every week I read about or meet that are building their own either enterprise version of it or direct competitor to OpenAI. I think Apple might be the only one that is not trying to go directly after creating their own. And it's interesting if you read this article in Bloomberg. They're basically saying they're paying OpenAI for use of the distribution that Apple has. And so, we talked about this a while back, like what's the actual application other than this rabbit thing that's come out, what's the actual device that you're going to use this stuff on? Apple's betting big that it's going to be, the iPhone, and that, it will increase iPhone sales and Apple adoption just based on it being, built in,
Right. It's not a perfect analogy by any means, but think of location. Right. Location allows a lot of other things to work. Right. But that's not, is there a location app? Right. Do I need to get an app to find out where I am? No. Right. So it's one of those things that allows other things to work. Maybe Google Maps is the closest to a pure location app. Yeah, there's GPS if you need a GPS. Most people don't use a GPS app on a daily basis, but they use location constantly, right? Tracking food, delivery, so on and so forth. So maybe it sounds like Apple is saying, this AI is more like a location, that it's going to enable a lot of other things to happen that are already out there today, as distinct from something which is wholly new. I don't think so. As I've talked to people who are building AIs and as people interact with them, I do think it's a different paradigm. And it's an interesting thing because as the work that I'm starting to do, to get a sense of it, the big change is this movement from, oh, click here, click there, 5 drop downs, right? You're talking to one of the developers yesterday. I said, is it as simple as we used to have to code 5 steps, right, for the user to follow to get to an answer, and now you just ask the question? He goes, yeah, and that's a huge thing, right? If you say, give me an answer, as opposed from here are the 5 steps to pro version, right? Then that's a radically different thing. And if then you can follow up and ask other questions, that's a big change. Also, I think you're starting to see now the first, what I'm calling like pro AIs, right? That are highly specialized, where they're not for the average person. Like it's not a general person, it's specialized, or SPTs, and you call them that, would be like an AI for medicine, or AI for design, or AI for some particular task that is not a general thing of just a replacement, a better Google. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, that seems where where Meta is going with their AI. Although, so this new kind of shakeup that they have is based on really pushing the wearables business. Apparently, they had some pretty big interest in this Ray-Ban product that has Meta AI built into it. So now they're kind of doubling down on that and trying to, I guess, do the same thing Apple is in a way, right? Put this on a device, put Meta AI on a device that is, available for general use, and they're trying to do it for just the wearable space, and have this AI that can be part of your daily life instead of having to go onto like a browser or whatever. Amazon, same thing, I guess, with their idea behind a rival to ChatGPT, but for which is code named Metis, by the way, because that's not confusing. But it's about retrieval augmented generation, which I guess is their way of trying to salvage what they started with Amazon Alexa and trying to use it for retail purposes.
Well, the other thing, right, is that certainly the race is on to find out to discover the next iPhone, right? What has it been, 30 plus years since that became the dominant piece of hardware for accessing technology? Most people, when they interface with technology, it's not the car, right? It's through their phone. And so it's had a great run. If you look at phones in the last 5+ years, the innovation curve has certainly slowed down. They're not changing very much, right? The camera gets a little bit better, whatever, but the form factor it's basically been the same.
Yeah.
Other than experiments here that with foldables, this looks a lot like the first version, right? Structurally. So
I always said, if you don't care about the format and you don't care about the camera, I mean, the phones are not that different than they were 10 years ago.
yeah, how they work is
Computing power,
different, but what they are is not. And so I know people who are thinking, hey, it's about time, right, for the next shift that goes to the pen, the wearable pen that was launched, right? Other glass, remember Google Glass?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What was 10 years ago, so maybe more. So there is this attempt to think through what is the next interface, and maybe because AI has such a radical view that you wind up with something different. This is the idea of just maybe a pen or a microphone, where instead of opening your phone and having to type in stuff, you just say, and you ask a question. Long ago, when we talk about RFID, there was this vision and supply chain of walking through a store and having the things talk to you.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a garment. I was made here. Here's my history, or here's the way I was sourced. So there's long been this conversation about enabling speech and things that are mute, right? And it's sort of happened in cars in many ways, right? Because cars can interact with us in a way that was unthinkable 20 years ago. But maybe there are other things coming as well. So, and maybe because of AI, that seems to have picked up a little bit of pace. Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's also some significant advances in the edge computing, IoT space, in cell phone networks, especially in Europe. So now all of a sudden you have that compute power on a device like that maybe doesn't necessarily need the same resources as your phone does. So it gets interesting.
Mm-hmm. More to watch. Huh?
So let's get to our main topic, which is social media. And I think this was spurred on. You and I had some good discussions about this, just off and on the podcast. And then the U.S. Surgeon General comes out a couple weeks ago and basically says that he wants to put warning labels on social media platforms like they did to cigarettes in the '60s. So, I know you have. So, and by the way, in preparing for this, I found myself trying to take the counterpoint to where I think you're going to argue, but then I ended up on both sides of it. So, let's unpack it. But what's your initial thought?
My sense is this, and I wrote it. There's a chapter in my book about persuasion and these kinds of communications in social media, and I do think it's one of those technologies that fits. I coined this term the Lin effect, right? Which is that argues that any significant technological invention creates more problems than it solves in its first iteration, and it takes subsequent waves of innovation to erase those problems to get net benefit from the invention. Social media certainly is the case. As an invention, it has solved very few problems, if any, perhaps, right? And it's created way more. And it's put I think a huge cost in society for what I think seems very little of any discernible benefit. We talked about last time was, as a species, right? As humanity, how have we improved because of the iPhone in general, but certainly because of social media. So to me, it's a tax, right? It creates all kinds of problems, from just annoyances to people getting killed, and at least I can identify what is the great thing that would be lost if it disappeared tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have trouble with that debate, man. To me, it's like any. I guess to your earlier point, right? Social media is like any technology in the sense that it has pros and cons. Maybe it accelerates those pros and cons, but it accelerates both the pros and the cons, I think, equally. I mean, you could go back to the Industrial Revolution and say, oh, machines killed people, right? But they also made people's jobs better. I don't want to discount the negative side of social media, because there's some really, really scary stats actually coming around, even psychological, mental issues that I want to talk about. But to say that social media hasn't had an effect on, global connectivity, social change, education, even arguably mental support, the creation of communities and stopping isolation for certain groups of people. I mean, there's definitely benefits there.
I would argue the exact opposite. Everything I've read is that every single thing you listed has gotten worse. Isolation is worse, right? Bullying is worse. There were communities online before social media came along. I really struggle to find what is the great benefit to society that platforms like X or Facebook or anything else have brought, right? That you couldn't have done without them. And you say, when you add the net negatives, my sense that negatives overwhelmingly override the positives, right? What could you not have shared a photo with someone before Facebook? Of course you could have. Could you not have updated somebody? Yes, you could have. You could have communicated, sent a message. All the things they did was package certain functionalities into platforms, but the way they operate, my sense is that, and the way and the kind of behavior that they rewarded is where the problem is, right? It isn't the functionality per se; it's what they reward and what they encourage people to do. And
Well, I agree with that. I think you got two things there, right? I think to say that these things haven't done good, like I said, there's people that have reconnected with loved ones because they had more of a reach. There's people that joined communities that they didn't even know existed and are getting support, whether it's a business community or another community. I've got I know people that are have children with disabilities that have connected and felt not alone, right? And maybe they live in in a place in the country where they don't have those things locally, but on a global scale they can access those resources. Certainly, education. I mean, you're an educator. Education is more available to certain income, certain geographies that have internet access that they didn't, it's changed the education. But I agree with you in the sense that, what's the motivation behind it, right? So there's this really, yeah, go ahead.
It's not, have they not done any good? Obviously they have. They wouldn't exist. They were completely useless. But the question is where is the good equal to the bad, right? Is it 50%? My argument isn't that there's no good. I'm saying that the problems that have been created, the harm they've done, far outweighs the good they've done. Not that they don't do any good, but the fractionation of society, the polarization of society, right, driving people apart, those things are much worse because of social media than they are than the benefits created. Think about cable news, right? Back to the creation of CNN. And you went from 1 hour, half an hour of news to 24-hour news cycle. Has there been good things, right? Were there good things about the fact that you had 24-hour news at some point? I suppose there are. But I think on net, the fact that you had to fill up 24 hours of programming meant that you had to put things that on the air that probably shouldn't be on the air. And so we created the echo chamber, which is what we have today. So again, were there positive things about 24-hour news coverage? Yes. Was it overwhelmingly positive? No, I think overall it was a negative on society, at least on American society. Maybe other sides are a different thing.
No, but to me, like most things, the answer is probably somewhere in between. I mean, we're talking kind of two opposite extremes. I mean, you think about, we were a country where, the mafia basically ran, a good chunk of the economy of this country, and the main reason was that there was no concerted efforts there wasn't the ability for law enforcement to even interact with each other to a point where they could find these guys. It wasn't until they started printing pictures in newspapers where they even knew what these guys looked like. Police officers would bump into a mob boss and not even know who he was because they didn't know what he looked like, right? So, media, certainly has a role, but I agree. So I think we're much more educated. I think the average, person in the United States and Europe is much more educated than they were 60, 70 years ago. But you're right. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the media business. The idea that you have to fill 24 hours worth of news, and I think worse than trying to fill 24 hours worth of news is trying to generate enough revenue in advertising to support 24 hours in news, and then have a business model where, shareholders always want more. I think that's where it breaks down, but there's certainly, benefits in the middle. And I think that the business model is where the challenge, really comes up.
In fact, it's actually a misnomer to call it 24 news. But if you watch CNN for 24 hours, it's not 24 hours of news.
The same stuff.
It's like Fox, CNBC. It's maybe an hour of news, and the rest is commentary, right? Yeah. The 23 hours, that's not news, because the news is kind of like a constant, right? That it stays about an hour. The rest of the time isn't news. It's discussion, it's commentary, it's opinion. So what we created was the news content didn't change, but the opinion content. And what happened was that people decided that they'd like to hear what they already thought. Right? Nobody wanted to be told contrary opinions. So you gravitated to the person who was saying, if you're left, you go to CNBC. If you're right, you go to Fox, or now there are other options as well. And I think that has been, I don't think it's somewhere in the middle. I think it's overwhelmingly a demerit, right? I think it harms society. It's not, half of it is good, half of it is bad. At least I think, and I think social media is the same way. I don't think it's 50-50 proposition from what I see and what everything I've read and studied. Right. And by the way, this is knowing that what the average person sees, which is another phenomenon, right, is just the tip of the horror iceberg. Right. If you go and read about the moderating job at these platforms, the people who keep the most horrible online content away from our screens, right, it is a nightmare thing. Right. It's people come out of there traumatized, needing therapy. And so there is a whole industry of people who work at places like Facebook, whose job is to keep the vilest thoughts and images away from people's screens. And so if you actually included that, right, if you keep the stuff that people would love to show us on social media, it wouldn't exist. It's only because an army of people, tens of thousands of people, get up every day and spend their day looking at horrendous things to keep them out of the out of the platform, that these things are even function. Because if those jobs didn't exist, I think society would shut them down. It's in their interest to keep them away from us, because if we saw what people would like to show us, right, the whole thing would just collapse. And I think it's, it's like if there were like, I don't know, a social club, right, and you go, okay, we're going to judge it on the basis of the 6 rooms we can see and ignore the 3 rooms we can't. Right? And you go, you don't want to know what happens in those 3 rooms, but don't worry about it, because these other 6 rooms, people are having reunions, right, and having birthday parties. Yeah, but don't go in that.
But isn't that just society? Like I think, I remember years ago hearing this analogy of, social media is no different than a town square on steroids. The old town square where people would, come in and have these opinions, and some of them were nuts and some of them were not, and some of them were accurate and some of them were not. So to me, this is just, the town square on steroids.
It is like that, because the person in town square couldn't reach 10 million people in 15 minutes, right? The town square of 1944, even if you were screaming in Times Square, maybe it's hundreds, maybe thousands, right? Today, somebody can get online and go viral, quote unquote, right, and be in front of millions of people, and that is a serious effect. Look at when you get politicians that are threatened to be killed on both sides, right? And which results from stories on social media. That doesn't happen in the Times Square model. You're not going to, somebody who's in one part of the country who doesn't like politician A, they have to go do something. You can't just go online and say, this person should be killed. And then a few days later, somebody in the other side of the country decides, yeah, I saw that. That must be true, because it got reinforced by millions of likes and retweets. So now, great, I'm going to go take a hammer and go beat somebody up, right? Or shoot somebody. I think that's the part that's wildly different. The speed and scale of the damages somebody can do online and social media is something we've never had before. You needed to be an emperor or a king to be able to reach the number of people for most of human existence that we can reach, that anybody can reach today with a couple of clicks. And that's
again, it's just an accelerator. So then we as a society have a choice of, do we want to accelerate the good or accelerate the bad? It's just, you can't blame the vehicle. You got to blame the, what the vehicle is being used for.
But we do blame vehicles, right? And we locked down nuclear weapons for a reason, because we looked at ourselves and said, we can't trust ourselves with this stuff.
Right, but we don't stop nuclear power plants. You're saying let's eliminate everything nuclear because the negative outweighs the positive. I'm saying you got to figure out a way to harness nuclear power, not just eradicate it.
Well, we actually did, right? Most nuclear power went way backwards after the 3 Mile Line, especially after Chernobyl. So we saw that, not everywhere, right? But a lot of places said, sorry, not worth it. But the benefit we got is just not worth it, because if things go wrong, they go wrong so fast and so wrong that we're not going to take that chance. And I think that these things are sort of like that. And because we only see a small part of it, and very few people understand the totality of Meta, right? Maybe hundreds of people. They can count maybe even there's less than 100 people who really understand what that platform is. So they're so big. I'm talking about with billion plus people. You can't conceptualize that, right? So we see a fraction of it, a small piece. And it's very easy for Meta to show us a small piece where everything looks hunky-dory. Again, right? It's the building where a lot of the rooms are having birthday parties for kids, and other rooms are hosting horrible things. People are getting killed, whatever. But as long as you see only the room with the birthday party kids, you think the building is great. But if you ever toured the whole building and you understood everything that's happening inside, you go, oh my God, this thing needs to be shut down. And I think that's what we have social media. We have, because it's so big, what we see of it doesn't encompass what it really is in its totality, right? Again, is there a version that might be different? Is it a version that would be more positive than negative? I don't know, maybe. But my sense is I don't, if it is, where is it? Right.
Well, and then the other part of it is, what do you do, right? So, even if the truth is somewhere in between where you and I are, what do you do with it? I'm of the opinion that you're not stopping it. It's the next evolution of the world. That certainly the generations younger than us, it's already part of their daily, lives. It's so pervasive that, I don't think you can take it away from them. They would just, look what happens with some of the traditional social media platforms. If TikTok gets banned, they're just going to find the next TikTok. You're not going to change the behavior that's already been, created, at least for the younger generation. So what do you do about it? That to me is the bigger question. I saw there's this New York Times op-ed published by this billionaire, Frank McCord. He's actually the guy who is bidding on buying TikTok. And he's been one of the most vocal people to say, this is an epidemic. We need to address this. But yet he's the one trying to buy TikTok. So I was reading this and I'm trying to figure out, what am I not getting? And it turns out he wants to buy TikTok, but without the recommendation algorithm.
And the interesting part is, if you say it's now become part of the fabric of young people, well, what is that thing? Remember, there was a time when smoking was, everybody smoked, right? Especially kids, teenagers. People started smoking when they were 14 or 15. And you could have looked at smoking in 1955 and say, oh my God, you'll never get smoking out of America. People smoke on planes, they smoke in cars, smoking weed. It was everywhere. It was ubiquitous. It was a part of life that started when you were a teenager. And you could have argued, you'll never get kids to give up cigarettes. But you know what? There was a whole battle fought for decades, right? To make the case. And today, I think most kids probably don't pick up cigarettes. Most people don't smoke. Why? Because there was a social compact that was made to eliminate this activity because it harmed people more than it did good. Not that smoking didn't have some, there was not some pleasurable aspect of it or social aspect of it.
But they didn't make it illegal. They didn't make smoking cigarettes illegal. They made it.
Well, they made it illegal,
right? Where you couldn't, people, market it to children. Okay, so there's something there, right? You can't market it to children. At least in the U.S., you couldn't put it in movies anymore. And the warning, the Surgeon General warning, has gotten so big that it's bigger than the brand and the and the name of the pack of cigarettes, right?
Right, and they did make it illegal for some things, right? I think that one first step is to say that it'll be hard to enforce, but if you say, look, social media is not for kids, just start there, right? That it because of its totality and its psychological impact, we can't allow a mind that's still developing, that's still forming, to be exposed to what happens in this space, right? One thing I think that is for sure, in my opinion, is that social media is an adult platform. And you really have to have your head screwed on right, ideally, to be exposed to it. And you probably shouldn't be exposed to it willy-nilly, right, when you're 12 or 13. And so one thing that could be done is people have argued to say, look, and now I think there was a law that was passed where you say there is an age limit for this stuff, because we're discovering that you really need to be a little bit more mature than we thought in order to direct these platforms in the right way. You're right. It is. I don't think it's about outlawing. I think it's about protecting the people who are vulnerable, segments that are vulnerable, usually kids, and then also education and saying, understand, take a step back and ask yourself what you get from these platforms, right? If you read articles who are not on social media or who abandon it, yeah, they go through a kind of detox for a while, but they're fine afterwards.
No, I agree with you on the sentiment. I actually have a whole list of psychological issues that have been caused by, to our society based on social media. But I think where I take issue with your argument is I don't think banning something ever works. When they banned alcohol, they created an alcohol industry. When you stop kids from drinking, when you tell your kids they can't drink, they hide it. They go out and they find booze somewhere else. I think to me, I'd rather see education in the form of how to use this properly, be aware of the issues. Because by the way, what also happens is, so take the kid that has never been exposed to alcohol. Alcohol is bad. It's evil. You should never drink it. Bad, bad, bad. Guess what happens when that kid goes to college? They become a crazy drinker, right? Because it's they want what they haven't. It's taboo, right? I don't think you want to make social media taboo to the extent that they get to 18 and now there's all these predators out there that they don't know how to deal with because they've never been educated on it.
Right, but to just let them loose in the park of predators with no warning and no training and no support may not be the best idea either, which is kind of what happens on social media, right? We say, oh, you're going to get predator training, so that's why I'm putting you on Meta when you're 8, right? So if that is the case, then why not have some kind of graduated access to this stuff where you're exposed to it little by little? Again, it's not about banning, it's to say, the evidence has come in that says if you enter these platforms when you're very young, it's why we have movie ratings, right? We don't want you to see somebody blowing away 100 people when you're 6, ideally, right, because your brain can't process what you're seeing. It's traumatic. So there is enough trauma on social media, which is easy to find, or it'll find you if you're a certain demographic, that you say, we want to protect developing minds from this imagery, from this language, right, from these experiences, until they can process it correctly. And I think that's the thing, because if you don't, then you're saying whatever you come across, you should just sort it out for yourself. Right? And I don't think we have that. We don't have that attitude in any other aspect of society, right? We don't even have it in something as benign as movies. We don't even have it in theme parks. We say you have to be this tall to get on this ride. Well, why not say you got to be this tall to be on Facebook? Because we understand that you can be harmed by this, right? So we protect kids from the worst things that could be exposed to until they're ready to manage it on their own. And I don't know why social media got a pass on this.
I agree. I think there has to be some responsibility on the platform. Like, if you're a school, if you're a daycare, you're responsible for protecting the children that are within your care, right? So, if you're going to have kids on social media, you should be responsible for protecting that. That is not, that, like you say, that's not a new concept. That is something that should be, part of it. If you're going to offer something up to children, it should be safe for children. So I agree with you on that. I think the idea of just, ignoring it or banning it just will backfire. It always does. And then, you also have the competitive, to just bring this back to business, right? You have the competitive world. Like my little kids and I'm in the tech space, been in tech my whole life. My kids are probably better on a tablet than I am these days, right? So if you can turn that into if you can, like any other parent, right? Any other parenting thing, if you can help them, get the positives out of it, then they'll be better off than somebody who's never been exposed to it and has to start when they're whatever it is, 18, 19.
I think it's a dialogue right then. It's a conversation that for whatever reason, other countries have had, some countries haven't. We just haven't, right? We haven't done and said, now this thing has been around for a few decades. We have information on what's effect has been. What has it brought that's positive? Great. The parts that are positive, let them thrive, right? All more power to you. And so let's accelerate that. Let's expand that. The parts that we now know are harmful, because that's the Surgeon General's warning, right? He didn't just wake up and go, I feel like banning or warning you about social media. You know what it must have taken them to get to that point, right? Decades of information and studies for him to walk on Today's Show and say that. So let's just assume that there's some basis for that. At least have a conversation as a society that says, everything's open to everybody, right? On social media approach, which is basically what it is today, right? Self-policing, which they don't really do. That's probably not the best way to go. It's time to take a step back and say, what parts of this world, and it is a world, right? Digital world, should be cordoned off, right? Should be hidden or not allowed to be accessed, and in a serious way, by kids, because the harm to them potentially is greater than any benefit they're going to derive.
Yeah. And like you said, the precedents are there, right? I mean, if you even an industry like the pornography industry, right? There's
Yeah.
liability there for them, right? If they're not doing everything they can to keep illegal activities off of their platform, they're responsible for that, right? So I think that kind of mentality would be beneficial. The warn, by the way, the warn and like the warning labels, right? So you can say, wait a second, do I understand like what's really going on in this particular platform? By the way, the warning labels in 1965 is when they were added to cigarettes. 42% of Americans smoked daily in 1965. By 2021, the figure was 11.5% of the population. So you can say there's other factors there, but they cracked the code on the right combination of, not advertising it to children,
Right.
and warning adults, hey, have you really looked into this?
Oh, and by the way,
that's the issue with social media, right? It's that you don't know
they didn't make
how
it
it works.
illegal. They made it illegal for minors to buy cigarettes, right? Not that you can't stop it, but there's a whole population that won't buy, right? Because of that. Not everybody will buy, but a lot of them won't because it's not worth the hassle. It's too much trouble, or they kind of makes them pause for a second. So I think that even if you say this won't stop everybody, but it will stop a whole bunch from trying it because they just don't think it's worth the hassle. It's the ones on the margin, right, Dan? The people who really, really want to do it, you're right, they will. But a whole bunch won't. It's not worth the hassle or the aggravation, and you stop them from harming themselves. Again, once you're an adult, you want to go on social media, knock yourself out. But the real issue is not adults, and it's not a libertarian view of, you can do whatever you want. Consenting adults, as long as it's not illegal, that's great. But for kids who are not yet able, right, to make decisions, and especially ones who have parents who are kind of checked out and never look at what they're doing, never check what their browsing history is, don't use FaceTime or anything. I mean, the guards that are in these devices, these kids are exposed to stuff dozens and dozens of hours. I mean, it could be 15, 14 hours a day, right? Look at your kids, right, usage time on mobile devices, right? If you really look at it for the first time, the first time I saw with the Apple Parent thing, I was shocked. It's like, how many hours, how many pickups of the devices, right, on a daily basis? And you say, I don't have any idea what happens when the device gets picked up. I have no idea what they're looking at when they look at these sites. Don't I have some responsibility as a parent to at least assess that, right, and try to figure out whether there's any harm being done to this kid by this? You would think every parent would, just because it's a parent, but not every parent is conscientious. So there are probably some things that as a society we can do to say, let's protect some of these kids who are not being protected until they're old enough to make these calls on their own. Right?
It's as much about educating the parents, right? Because you're talking about a generation where, as sophisticated as, like I said, as sophisticated as I think my generation is with technology. If you look at the acceleration curve of technology, our kids will be further from us than we were from our great grandparents, right? So if you think about from like the invention of the telephone to the internet, it's going to be even more drastic than that with AI and blockchain and all these technologies. But to have that education or that, just that proverbial warning label to say, wait a second, have you done all the research? So, what I'm concerned about is not, hey, let's get rid of all of this, but I don't think that the average person, certainly, like you say, the kids, but I would even say the average adult is not up to speed on, because the social media companies don't make it don't publicize, right? Are not up to date with the statistics around what's happening to us, right? So the psychological changes, you could say bad, good, bad, at least be aware of it. If you want to smoke a cigarette, but be aware of what the potential health risks are. And in the case of social media, the more and more I read about the mental health and psychological ramifications, it's more and more synonymous with a drug.
Yeah.
Right? The people that are on social media, they need constant stimulation. It has negative effects like withdrawal. It has reduced attention span, more of a addiction to dopamine releases. There was even one report that said there's early indications that our our biological DNA, our thumbs are becoming more predominant than other fingers because of phones.
And by the way, there's only one difference, that Pablo Escobar didn't have 1,000 PhDs working for him, right? Trying to figure out how to make the drug better. And these people do more, right? And so they pay top dollar to the best engineers, the best designers, the best, right, architects of this stuff to figure out how to make the drug more powerful every single day. So it's not a constant. These things get worse, right? The chemists that make this stuff addictive are hard at work 24 hours a day to make it even more so. So it isn't even as bad. It's worse, right? Because you got the world's most, if it is a drug, then it's being sold by the world's most sophisticated drug dealers.
Yeah.
And the richest and the most powerful and the most politically connected, right? Which is why we've been so conditioned that to even ask this question for people seems silly, but it isn't, right? Because it's like to your point, the science is in, the data is in, it's damaging society, the youngest part of society, and we should think of ourselves as having a responsibility to do something about that, right? Until such time as we feel, okay, you're old enough to make these calls on your own, and then after that, great, right? We've done it, like to your point, there are precedents everywhere where alcohol, with cigarettes, with driving, with movies, where as a society we decided, you know what, carte blanche, full access to this stuff at the age of your choosing will not be allowed, right? We won't, because we understand the risks. So there'll be a day when you can buy a car and go wherever you want. Beautiful. It's not when you turn 12.
Yeah.
So,
right. Well, and I like also, I don't know if I haven't seen the numbers on its effectiveness, but you start to see little things like, like when we upload this video to YouTube, right? There's a question: is this for kids?
Right.
Right. And in theory, if you're a company, I mean, I guess I'd like to see the proof in the pudding is if there's an advertiser that's saying this is for kids or this is not for kids and it is for kids, or if there's kids content that violates whatever terms and agreement. Will they kick that advertiser off? Right. That's where the rubber meets the road on this stuff. But in theory, I think that's a good thing to say, hey, wait a second. This is content that's not for kids. This is content that is for kids. And we're going to hold you accountable to make sure that sex model is actually a consenting adult.
Right. And it could be that you wind up with, look, there's a meta adult version, right?
Right.
Full experience, but you have to verify that you're 18, like they do, I guess, with porn sites. And there's a version which is anybody can access, right? We're not going to worry about that. It's more about proving that you are of age to use the entire platform. Until then, we won't open the whole building up to you. Right. So it could be as simple as that. And it would be great if it was social media platforms that were the ones clamoring for this stuff. It shouldn't be us, right? The users. It should be them saying, these are the models we have in place, right? Experimenting, innovating to solve this problem, not waiting for somebody to have hearings or somebody to die or whatever for them to be forcibly changed. Why can't they be the ones who solve this problem? It's their platform, right?
We need this. We need an episode of Sesame Street, Carlos. I remember the episode of Sesame Street where they said Cookie Monster finally said cookies are only a sometimes snack.
Okay, there you go. And
right.
Right.
So I still eat cookies, but I feel guilty when I do.
Yeah, yeah, right. Exactly. This is the best way to put it. On that note, we can end, right? The customer say, hey, you know what? Social media, it should just be a sometimes snack.
Sometimes snack, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, if we get to the point where, people understand the pros and cons and, they can, maybe it's a bad analogy, but if they, if you want to drive 100 miles an hour down the highway, you might lose your license or you might die. But that's the risk you're taking, right?
Right. Uh-huh. Well, look, I obviously to be continued, but I do have the option that at some point society will wake up and say this is out of control. All right. And things like the warning is only one thing, but there can be a cumulative effect. I think it does matter for a big population. So it's just one more thing that tips the scales, hopefully one day. And we sit back and say, wait a minute, right? What have we allowed to be created?
Well, and there's something more. I know we're almost out of time, but there's something more about this. So everybody should follow up reading homework is this New York Times op-ed in response to the Surgeon General's warning labels on social media by the guy Frank McCourt is his name, who wants to buy TikTok, and he's like I said, he's the one that is pushing this Project Liberty initiative to decentralize the internet and make these, take some responsibility, or especially around the next generation of children and what younger kids are getting involved. He's actually critical of the government, saying the government can't possibly regulate this, effectively because it happens too quickly and the government's too slow. So it's going to take, private people and groups and associations to do it. But the part that jumped out at me, I alluded to it before, is that the algorithm, the recommendation algorithm, which I think is what makes TikTok so addicting, and other platforms have similar things. His purchase of TikTok will not include that algorithm. Mm-hmm. So in theory, the platform then becomes, something that you go to when you want to, and it maybe becomes a useful resource like any other tool. But you then know, at least in theory, that there's not some underlying engine there that is commercially motivated to do things that are not good for society.
Yeah, maybe in the perfect world, right, it is entertainment. It's not digital crack, right? And we just need to dial it back a little bit so that it becomes entertainment, right, or amusement, or some sort of thing that isn't what I see most of the time, right, which is that it is an addiction. It really is. It is an addiction.
Well,
right?
We've talked about this before too. I think on maybe our show with about storytelling. But and I think you were the one who said this. Like, it's interesting if you take the word social media, right? I think if you separate that out and say you have social networks over here, not to be confused with media, because I think that's where the lines start getting blurry, especially when you add in, like you say, an algorithm that continues to show you what you already want to hear.
I think it is really social manipulation, right? It is a social manipulation network to capture attention, to sell to advertisers. And because the people who build them are very good. And if you watch the people who like the talk about who meant the like button, right? These are not accidents. They're not serendipitous discoveries. They're the product of thousands and thousands of hours of experimentation, of science, of trial and error, of A/B testing to get a platform, right, that makes you think like you're in control, but you're really not, right? And which is designed to get you to come back for another hit, another hit, another hit. And they're very good at this. And I think that phenomenon that we have created generations, now two at least, of people who are addicted to digital stimulation, right?
It's not just, but you're right. But it's not just digital. It's actually changing the way that our brains work, right? It's right. Making us want shorter our attention spans are lower. Our need for a dopamine hit is higher. The amount of there was also a really interesting study about what they call deep work, and they're saying that I don't remember the number, but a ridiculous amount of people never enter into a deep work, a focused work, because of the constant interruption. So your brain is only working at a surface level, a responsive level. It's not actually doing the really amazing cognitive things that it's designed to do.
And look at the fact that we had to go to shorts, right?
That's exactly what I was talking about.
Right. That 1 minute video was too long. So now let's go to something which is only
I can see it in myself, right? If I go to a video, like if I'm in between meetings and I don't have like a whole bunch of time, like to me, regular YouTube videos are like reading a book. There's like time at the end of the day where I devote to just learning and educating, and I'm not. But when I'm working and I'm doing this kind of stuff, if I see a video that's not a short, or it's not a shorter YouTube video, next, right? I don't have time.
And there are other things that are even more complex, right? I talked about this, the effects of social media from a language standpoint, right? And psychology, like sentimentality, right? Because TikTok and Instagram run on images. There's a lot of sentimentality in that world. So I think that young generations are bombarded with fake emotions. And if you grow up being bombarded with fake joy, fake sadness, fake outrage, fake this, it becomes hard to tell the real one when it shows up. And I think that there have been effects that go deeper than what we've discussed, that are psychological, that are a result of these platforms. And once again, as a society, we just ignore them. We don't even engage with this stuff. And that's part of what we've been trained to do, right? To dismiss this stuff as not that big of a deal. But you have to ask yourself, is our opinion of these platforms a product of the platforms itself? Right? If you believe that they're not a problem, was that also engineered into the platform to get you to believe that they're not a problem? Right? So what was the old joke about the greatest trick devil ever pulled? Right? Remember, was to convince everybody he didn't exist. The greatest trick that social media platforms have created ever pulled was convincing people that they're not a problem.
At scale. That's
At
like
scale.
to me, it's back to the scale thing, right? I mean, yeah, you go back to the Bible, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, right? It's already always been built into society. But when you and by the way, it's not just social media, it's AI, it's all these things, right? But where you take it at a level of scale, it's that town square, at scale.
We know that the history is that when big corporate interests discover usually that their product has problems, the answer isn't to admit it. The answer is to engineer denial into society, right? And this is just what happened with fossil fuels, happened with cigarettes, happened with guns, and it's
Drugs,
happening.
pharma.
Right. You don't admit it. You figure out a way to get people to believe that it's not a problem. And they've done a phenomenal job at that, right? Which is why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and that's it's hard to that's why we circle back to the topic of society, right? We normally try to keep this business related on these conversations, but it is a societal issue, and try to avoid a political conversation, but it does get difficult, right? To marry unchecked capitalism with these things where you say, hey, if the only criteria is revenue and shareholder value, then why would you not just keep reinventing, re-engineering to keep it going, fuel special interest groups, to lobby politicians who most of which don't know anything about this stuff? If you don't believe that, watch the Zuckerberg trials or the Ticketmaster trials.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So that's that. I think that's the issue. I think we have to get the problem is people don't trust. So certainly, devout Catholics. I was like devout Catholics, devout capitalists don't believe in regulation. So how do we, topic for another day, but how do we thread that needle? How do we find the right combination of innovation and capitalism, but also, hey, if you're not going to be doing it in a responsible way, there will be repercussions to pay.
Look, basically, to me, right, when everything's said and done, two parties here: the social media platforms and their owners and kids. The platforms have the lobbyists, the politicians, right? Where are the lobbyists and the people for the kids? It should be the parents. That seems to be the case for whatever reason. So who's spending tens of millions of dollars on behalf of the kids, right? Where are the law firms? Where are all the consultants? Where are all the PhDs? Where is the industry that gets up every day and says, my job is to protect kids' social media? I know the industry gets up every day and says, how do I exploit kids on social media? Those are easy to find, right? Just go on LinkedIn. Where are the ones whose job is to do the opposite, to keep these kids safe, right? And that would be, if it were a fair fight, right, Dan? Maybe, but it's hardly that, right? Mm-hmm.
Yep. Make a business out of it. If you're watching, make a business out of that, right?
Well, I guess not everything can be a business, right? So this is what for the parents and for the site, like I said, this is why we decided in certain things after we understood what they were, right? That we said, look, there was a time where there was no age limits to drive. Then there came a day where we said you can't drive unless you're this old. It may seem quaint 50 years from now that we go, oh boy, back in 2020, anybody could be on Meta, right? They even let kids join. Oh, how crazy were that? Well, also primitive times.
Yeah. Back in the days of barcodes.
Back in the days of 2020 when anybody could be on social media. You didn't even have to be an adult. Seeing kids smoke today. And people are like, oh yeah, right, that's crazy. Well, I really do think that at some point in this century, people will look back. Can you believe back in 2020 they let kids go on Meta?
Maybe TikTok will have that banner like Disney Plus does it. This was filmed in an era where smoking was tobacco use.
Exactly.
Carlos, thanks for your insights
All
as
right,
always,
man.
buddy.
So-
Good to have your perspective. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We're back in 2 weeks, every other week, Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, check out erpaai.com for additional resources. Take care, everybody.
Take care, Dan. Terrific listening. Thank you. Bye-bye.